Today we have Vicki Reyzelman, who's a principal strategic technology consultant at EG. And she is someone who really embraces innovation, problem solving, and leadership. So thank you and welcome, Vicki, to the podcast.
Thank you, Ivna, for having me on. I'm excited to speak with you today.
So I just learned some really fun things about you. Why don't you share with our listeners some fun facts about you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As we were sharing, we were talking about our backgrounds. You're from Brazil, and I shared that I'm actually originally from Uzbekistan. So I think officially I'm the first person on your podcast from Uzbekistan.
Yes, you
I
are.
lived there till I was 11 and then came to the US. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and I'm excited to have you as well, because you're a big supporter of innovation, and you've actually gained some awards as an innovative leader as well in your innovative innovations. I would like to explore that a little bit more. In one of your articles, you talked about the fact that employees in a speak up culture are 3.5 times as likely to contribute their full innovative potential. And that was an article that you wrote called Practical Innovation. I'll link it in the description box below for those in the listeners who want to read that. So how do you, as a leader, and if you have a story around this, would be great to hear. How do you engage your team members to speak up and share their concerns and disagree, assume mistakes, but also share their half-baked ideas? Because I imagine you have to share half-baked ideas to innovate, because that's where you start the process.
Yeah.
Especially when you are not around, when you're not around to help them out in this process. How can you foster this amongst them? And if you have an example of maybe someone who was very quiet in your team when they first arrived or you started, and then eventually they started to speak up and share, which led to innovation or ideas, it would be great.
Yeah, 100%. I'll tell you a story. It actually happened at Yahoo. So at Yahoo, I was leading a team of user experience designers. I was the senior product manager for a very big product between AT&T and Yahoo called Uverse DVR. So at the time, you couldn't record your shows besides using a remote, which was super clunky to record your favorite shows. So we created a web experience and a mobile experience for people to record their shows online for their Uverse. And we had about 6 million customers using the service. And as we did more and more kind of user studies, because in order to really create a great product, you really have to listen to the users. You have to see how they interact with the product. We had a little bet going. A lot of us being in technology for such a long time, we assumed that people search for their favorite show and record the show. So our initial feeling was around, hey, how do you find shows? By searching. But what we found from observing users, it's only 50% of people actually searched. The other 50% browsed to find their favorite shows, whether it was thousands of channels or hundreds of channels. So we really had to split our time and really think through the user experience. And so I remember I had a user experience designer from India. He was super quiet on our team, just straight out of Georgia Tech. And then I had a developer from the Midwest and myself. And we sat down, we said, how can we make this technology better? And we came up with a whole new search assist experience. So as customers would start typing their favorite name of their actress or actor, they would have a drop down and they can select and then go directly to the shows associated with that actor and actress. But in order for people to be comfortable to figure that experience out, they had to feel comfortable about coming forward and expressing a different way of doing something. And that's how I got the innovation award, was really we just received a patent for this technology that wasn't available at the time. And the innovation always happens in a group. People think there's a mad scientist somewhere and he sits in a dungeon or she sits in a dungeon and then she comes up with this great idea. And no, it's a team effort. And what you do in that team is you bring out the best in each other, because we all come from different backgrounds, different experiences. So really having that ability to give each other a voice and ability to speak and create something new is really important.
So giving each other a voice, and I agree with you. Back in the day, there were these crazy scientists like Lavoisier or Galileo. Like, it seems like they discovered things and did things themselves. But nowadays, we're so sophisticated that it's all a team effort. And a team effort where everyone comes with their own unique experience and views and knowledge, and together you can build on that. So you said that it's important to then bring each other's best in voices into that conversation. And sometimes some people might not be as comfortable for whatever reason. Maybe they're more junior, they're rookie, maybe
Right.
it's the cultural thing. So what are some of the things that you feel could help or have helped in your teams?
It's just one thing, it's trust. I think in order for teams to innovate and to truly create something new, they have to trust each other. They have to come into a room and feel comfortable bringing the stupid idea that they might have, right? And expressing that and not feeling judged for it, because the next one they express could be brilliant. But if we allow ourselves the space and they know that they can trust each other, that they will not be judged, that this is just brainstorming, we're just all creating, we have no idea what the right answer is. That's the beauty of it. And I think that's what I found in my career as well. The environments where I thrived as an individual is where there's no right way. You're creating the right way together, whatever that right way is. And there could be three other parallel or more right ways, but you just pick one. You pick one based on what you know, based on your assumptions, and you move forward with it. And I think that gives you the comfort. A lot of times, I think as women, we're always like, oh, I have to be right. You have to know the right answer before I speak up. I can't talk about this. I don't know everything. But most of the time, ideas come when you bring ideas from other fields. We do this like this in healthcare, but it could work better in retail, right? Two different industries, but they can help each other because you have a completely different background, different ideas of solving things. That's what makes it innovation interesting, is that there's no right way.
I see. So I agree with that. There's no right way. And you said that trust is such an important element to making sure that people feel comfortable
Right.
bringing forth their stupid ideas for brainstorming.
Right.
So how have you been able to create that trust when maybe the trust wasn't there initially?
It just takes time spending time together, right? And it usually takes time spending time together in random conversations outside of work, going to lunch together, just sitting next to each other, trying to brainstorm about an idea, doing so in a group. I think there's different dynamics. It doesn't just happen, it's earned in a way, if that makes sense. And it's earned through time. Sometimes you don't have time to build that trust, so you have to accelerate it, which means you really have to set the rules. Hey, we don't judge each other, we're gonna do our best. Everyone's allowed to contribute here. We're going to listen to your ideas. We won't necessarily take your idea forward, but we will listen to you. And so having that open discussion and being able to say, we're all equals here, let's figure this out. We want the best product. We have the same mission in mind, and taking some of there's always politics and there's personalities, things like that out of the equation as much as possible.
Interesting. So you said spending time together, just spending time together without necessary, it could be work-related brainstorming, but it could not, it could be something else, just understanding who that colleague is.
100%. That goes a long way, because we're all people, right? In the end, we want to feel when we come to work that people care about us, that we're heard, that we can be ourselves. And that's all that usually comes out through side conversations, right? It's, hey, what did you do this weekend? Oh, I went out with my kids and we went to the playground. Oh, great. We have something in common. I took my kids to the playground too. So that's all part of building trust.
So finding things in common, even finding situations where those conversations can happen more frequently rather than not so frequently, or only when there is something like a team event or something.
And
like
in person, if possible. Like, I know we're all online today and I love video, I love Zooms, but there's nothing like doing it in person. There's just something about body language, right? And watching the other person next to us. We can read so much more in terms of communication when we have all these other things besides words.
Yeah. And do you feel there's anything that helps even more in situations where there's an individual that is maybe from a very different culture? You mentioned an Indian individual, and especially if you said they were right out of school, they're the most junior person in the room, and culturally for them, it's better to listen and not talk too much. How do you handle that? Because there's just a different understanding of what their participation should be in that environment.
I think it's just showing empathy. Like one thing I always try to do in my teams is none of us are perfect, but all of us have strengths. And so what I try to do with people that I work with is I look for those strengths and I try to bring those strengths to the fruition. So I say, okay, Shiva, I know you're incredible in terms of interaction design. We have to figure out how this search assist will drop down. Can you create an interaction model for it? And let's look through a couple of options, right? So he has the leadership at this point to go and create 2, 3 versions of whatever he thinks is best. And then as a team, we can decide on the best one, right? With engineering team, etc. I think it's just giving people the ownership. I believe that people have to feel ownership in what they do, and then they will feel pride from their work. And that will resonate in the types of things that you create together, right? It all builds on top of each other.
Yeah, the ownership piece is critical for sure. And it allows people to speak up for that if they own something, they're more likely to speak up for it.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to speak up. I think I spent a lot of times with it, and I still do. We were talking about how you take 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. Even now that I've done over 25 years in technology, there's still days where I go in and I have no idea. I'm about to start a new job. Everyone's, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I'm going to figure it out, right? I'll learn more about the job as I go, and it's a new environment, and I'm just going to listen and try to figure out how I can use all my experience in this new position. And I think a lot of times it's just about that. It's no one knows everything. I think I've assumed when I was younger that, oh my God, all these senior people, they know so much more than me. I should just be quiet, stay in the back of the room. I really shouldn't voice my opinion because I don't know if this is the right thing to say. And I looking back, I was like, yeah, I can see why I did it. But I also see that it didn't really serve me. It didn't serve me in the long run. It took me much longer to get to where I am. Just in terms of confidence, no one knows what they're talking about. Half the time, people are just making up stuff and they're just more extroverted than I am, right? I'm more introverted, so I'm quiet. I have to think through it before I say something. So it's just understanding the psychology, understanding the people, and really developing your communication skills. And technology, we always focus on technology, but I think the most successful people are the ones that focus on communication, because those are usually the hardest problems to solve.
That half of the people in those meetings are making stuff up.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
You find out, you're like, what? Right. It's just, it's hard to understand that, because you're like, I have to give the right answer, and I don't know if it's the right one, and no one does. They just make it up.
And they make it up and say it like if it were the truth. People move on and they keep going, and nothing bad happens. Like it's actually a good thing. Just share your thoughts. It doesn't have to be this. It's not a Bible.
100%. And I think the other thing to remember is it's okay not to know. I think that took me a really long time. Like I would go in front of customers and they would ask me a question and I would be, and so I would get all stressed out. I would get pale. I'm like, I didn't prepare for this question. But I think as one thing I teach everyone that I mentor is that I say, no one knows. So if a customer or you're given a question that you don't know the answer, just take a step back and just say, hey, I don't know the answer to this. Give me 24 hours. I will investigate this. I will write you an email kind of summarizing what I've learned, and we can all get on the same page. And in 100% of the cases when I've done this, the customer, the boss, whoever you're talking to is perfectly fine with that. That actually shows them that you're very mature, that you understand that there's things you don't know and that you need to investigate. And that actually shows you up as a professional. And there's nothing wrong with that.
That's a great example, because often we feel like we have to know the answer. We have to speak immediately when someone asks us a question, especially if it's a customer, if it's a superior, or in a meeting that we don't have the right to not know, or that's going to make us look competent in some way. And sometimes we're trying so hard to look competent.
100%. We got to create a certain persona, right? Like we're showing up, we need to look confident, we need to know what we're talking about. And that's especially stressful, I think, in a consulting environment where you're meeting with different customers. You don't know the questions they're going to ask you. You don't know their personalities. So there's a lot more variables in place. And the best thing, like even with the meanest customers, the best thing to do is just say, That's a great question. Let me follow up on this. I'll get back to you and move on, right? Move on to something that you know about, that you can focus the discussion. And again, control the conversation in a way that shows your confidence in subjects that you know about, right? And that kind of turn it around on them a little bit.
Yeah, I think in TV interviews, right, I think people who are really used to that, and with journalists who are trying to get the ugliest side of a story for sensation, since those people who are being interviewed commonly know how to do that very well. Just pivot to an area that you have domain of, that you're comfortable talking about, that you want to advance the conversation in that direction. So I like that idea that you shared. And when did you learn, like, how did you discover and start implementing these changes and not feeling like you had to immediately answer everything and let people completely control the conversation and the agenda?
It's pretty recent, to be honest with you. I wish I could say I've done this all my life. No, it's just being in consulting, like at Akamai was probably the time in my career where I was in front of very technical customers who, for better or for worse, asked me things they knew, which were super deep technical questions. At times I could not answer those questions because it was their environment. It wasn't my knowledge, skill set. So at first I wasn't sure. I would just get down on myself. Oh, they asked me this question and I didn't know the answer and I just looked stupid. And then I think if time went on, I just said, they're asking me questions that they know the answers to, but I can ask them questions that they don't know the answer to, especially for those very difficult people. I'm sure we've all met with them, right? Where they're asking you questions just to show you that you don't know things. It's very important to just, again, take a deep breath, right? And just smile, have a good time with it and say, hey, that's it. I love your question. Let me go investigate it. Now we'll get back to you. Today, we're discussing A, B, and C. Let's get back to our agenda. And then I can handle all your questions after this meeting. So again, what you're doing in that situation is you're taking control back. Because all that, sometimes, I mean, we don't want to say that people are mean, but some people that are just trying to make it a little more difficult for you. So you just have to smile, take and be confident and take the control back. And I think people respect you more for that. And they show that you showed that courage, because a lot of times they don't get that feedback. And so it actually helps you with their relationship. We talked about trust. It actually helps you build trust with those individuals. In my experience, when they give you a hard time in the beginning, if you can show yourself and look confident and handle the situation, they will build trust with you much quicker than if you try to bullshit them and tell them something that you have no idea about and try to get out of it. It would make it worse.
So these people that may be intentionally difficult or not, they're just like that. And maybe they are actually using these little challenges and difficult comments in a way to figure out who you are subconsciously and see how you respond to that. And if you're able to keep your cool together and handle it well and with confidence.
100%. And you have to know the cultural ramifications. Of course, there's the individual, but there's also company cultural ramifications, right? People who work in different companies. Some company cultures allow for certain behaviors and others don't. It's also, psychology is something I started studying most recently, because one of the things you have to, especially when you see customers, is you have to dress and behave a little bit like them, right? To give you an example, Lowe's colors are blue and Home Depot colors are orange, right? So you can't walk into a meeting with Lowe's wearing an orange shirt, right? People will hate you, not because of who you are, what you say, because you're wearing orange and it's their number one competitor. So it's about really understanding, even when you walk into the meeting, you want to be using their logo in your presentations, right? You really have to think about who is your audience? What are they trying to get out of this opportunity? And my number one slide with my customers was always, what's on your mind? What are you thinking about? What are the projects? And I could have spent hours, which I did, preparing 100-page deck to present to them. But if they told me that none of that 100-page deck that I just prepared resonates with what's on their mind, I'm not going to cover it, or I'm going to cover it for a very short period of time. going to be focusing on what's important to them in that minute, what problems they're trying to solve. And I think that's also building trust because it shows that you care. You're not just there to talk about yourself. You're actually there to help them with whatever they're struggling with. And I think that builds trust. It's all about really communication and trust at the end of it. We all do technology, but technology is just a byproduct of how you solve the problem. The problem is always much broader than that.
Okay. There's so many things I could mention right now because you talked about showing that you care while simultaneously speaking up and building trust, but at the same time, problem solving, doing so to problem solve. So let's go to the problem solving.
Sure.
Did you ever have or encounter a situation where speaking up actually helped you solve a big?
Yes. I can tell you a story. I know you love stories, so let's see. I had a customer, I won't mention any names. I had a customer and they were going through a very stressful time. The stressful time was their websites essentially were not working. They didn't know what caused that outage. They had everyone, like every vice president on the call. They had our team on the call, every vendor helping out. And there was one person on that call, one of the vice presidents, and he just was yelling and screaming at my team. And it really had not, he was being disrespectful. I think that was, I know he was trying to solve the problem. This is how he was showing his stress level. But in the end, he was very disrespectful to my team members. And I wasn't even in that meeting at the time, but they were messaging me, said, hey, you need to show up in this meeting because this guy is just destroying us. And it's not even our fault. We didn't do it. It's not the cause of what we did. I said, okay. So I get into this meeting. I hear this guy he's yelling at everyone. He's yelling at my team. And I said, we need to stop this. Let's just take a moment. Let's just stop this right now. I said, do you want to solve this problem or not? Said, yeah, of course I want to solve this problem. That's what I'm trying to do. I said, we can't solve it when you're screaming at everyone. We need to rationally think for what could have caused this problem. And you being disrespectful to us, it didn't help to solve that. So we have two options here. You can stop yelling and we can continue solving the problem, or we're going to get off the call and we're going to get on when you guys are ready to solve the problem. Got really quiet. It got really quiet on the conference call. And then he came back and said, I do want to solve the problem. I said, that sounds great. Let's do it. So from that on, he was no longer being aggressive, right? And yelling at everyone. And my team was just to know, how did you tell him this? I'm like, you cannot let people disrespect you, right? We're trying to help this customer. He's being disrespectful. And until he takes the time to be calm, we really can't proceed because right now it's too stressful for us to even figure out what's causing the problem. So sometimes we're always afraid to say no. Oh, this person is a vice president. I can't talk to them that way. Like they deserve to yell at me. No one deserves to yell at you. You deserve respect. And I think realizing that was a big step for me too, right? That took guts on my part. I'll be honest with you. I was scared. I was like, they could fire me because I just talked to the customer this way. But I'm like, I'm just not going to allow my team to be trampled. And you have to take that stance sometimes. And people respect you more. We're always afraid that if we speak up, it will somehow be punished. I think as women, we're told to just comply, say yes. But I think a lot of times, like you have to stand up for yourself, not being disrespectful, but showing the person that they cannot behave in this way.
What an exceptional example, because it's so hard to deal with aggressive or people who in a moment are aggressive. And like you said, it takes a lot of guts, especially if they have higher titles than us at the time. So I'd love to know from you how, because you mentioned this twice already, that you feel like after you actually speak up and stand up for what you believe in, like in this beautiful example, that people respect you more. How do you notice people respecting you more?
I think their tone changes. Like they no longer use their aggressive tone. I think they make more eye contact if you're in a room with them. I know on video sometimes that's hard. I think it's just their demeanor. They ask you more questions. So instead of telling, they become more asking, which in my experience, when people ask you questions, they want your opinion. It's a way to show respect, right? Because when you ask people for advice, there's nothing better in the world, right? We all get a high from being asked, oh, tell me what you think about this. I'm like, let me tell you, right? We all get excited, even though we know that from research that advice to another person is not really a good idea. We know that from coaching, but I think it's just they show up differently, right? And the next time you speak, and the other thing is when customers started being disrespectful on the phone, for example, right? You never met them, but they feel like, hey, you're just a vendor XYZ and they can talk to you a certain way. It's important to go see them. I know it sounds like right now or like COVID, things changed a lot, but go see them. Because again, it goes back to that trust, whatever it is about us as humans. When people meet you face to face, you're no longer just a number, just another name that they talk to on the phone. You're now a human being, and something in their brain switches. Like, I'm talking to Vicki, a human being. She's just not like XYZ digits on the computer, right? Like, she's a person. She has a personality and a body, and like we can see her and we can go to lunch with her, right? And so the next time you're going to have lunch with that customer, it's going to be, or even a conversation on the phone, it's going to be a completely different tone, just because we need that interaction.
So we need to get out there and talk to
We
people.
need to get people. And that's what I think. Another thing, a story, but I shared recently that I was a part of a riff at Salesforce, and I recently found a new role that you introduced me with. And honestly, it's been a really hard time for me because it's just hard. It's a big change, a transition. I'm a very like stable person by personality. You're trying to figure out, and the job environment right now is not great. I mean, it's tough. You're competing with a lot of people. What I want to tell your audience is go meet people, go talk to people. And it was hard for me to even figure that out. Like I'll go into people meetings and I'm like, oh, I just met with all these people, but I don't know if any of them are actually going to help me find a job. Like, it's a waste of time. It's easy to feel like you're not doing it. It's easier to go on LinkedIn and connect with 100 people that you don't know and feel like you've done something, right? But there is something to this face-to-face that I think we all need to be aware of. And even on the phone, like we need to meet 15 minutes coffee chat. Take the time, make it a part of your like weekly routine. I'm going to have 2 lunch meetings, 2 coffee chats. It doesn't have to be about a job. It could be just forming a relationship. It could be talking about some random tennis match that you love to watch. Anything, kids, I don't know, whatever interests you. But it's that connection. You have to build on that. Humans are wired to connect, and most positions are not posted. People hire people they know, or people hire through people they know. And so as you move up in the organization, that becomes even more important to have that network for people to know about you and your work, and for others to connect you. And in the end, you're just meeting a bunch of really cool people. So that's always fun.
So have you done that in your jobs? Have you asked people who were above you in the rankings for 15-minute, 30-minute chats with no purpose whatsoever?
I have. I'm so bad about that too, because my husband always gets on me. He's like, why are you reaching out for a meeting? You don't have a agenda. I'm like, just want to say hi. It's just meet people, just say hi. I'm like, but it's really is. It's a lot. I'm not good at like rank and report. So I love talking to anyone. And one of the things I did at Akamai, we started our own podcast called Industry Insights. And what we did is we started interviewing people within the company. And so that was a great, because I would reach out to all kinds of, we're like, hey, you want to come on my podcast? And we're going to talk about you and what you do for Akamai. And that was a great way to network. I reach out to people and say, hey, I have an idea. Let me talk to you. And most people, they're human. They're like, this is great. And the higher up you go, you want to give back, right? These people, and less people want to talk to you because they're scared. I'm not talking. It's like, look at his title. Yes, but everyone wants to give back, especially if you're in a great organization. Senior people want to give back to more junior people. So this is, if you reach out, they're seeing that as a huge initiative, and they're going to help have that conversation. I'm not saying they're going to give you a job. I'm saying that you're going to learn something. That's the worst that can happen, is you'll learn something.
Wow. In the podcast is true. That's what I did with you. I reach
Right.
out to people and
Yeah.
I get to talk to the interesting people that I want to talk to. So
It's
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 a great
awesome.
strategy. But sharing ideas is great as well. And just getting thoughts on career advancement. And it does make a difference when there's a bit of chit chat
Yeah.
with people without that intention of productivity.
Right. I think people thrive on chit chat. We can pretend all day long that we don't like to because it talk about the weather, but we do in a way. Like I will tell you another quick story. A junior person that was shadowing me, she got on the calls with customers with me, and she was just watching me for a while just so she could get on the accounts on her own. And she said on the call, and after the call, I said, "What did you think about the call?" And she said, "You did something that no one else has done." And I said, "What did I do?" And she said, "You asked your customer how they're doing. You started the call with, 'How are you?' And you actually talked to them about them and you spent 5 minutes being interested. No one else does that." And I think that was like a really great reminder for me because I do that so naturally. But for many others, they dive into the problem and they don't spend, but it's that 5 minutes. It doesn't take a lot. It might be less than 5 minutes. Ask them about how they are. How are you? That's all it is. And people tell you, and then you develop relationship from there, and then they'll come to you with their problems. We talked about problem solving. When people have that rapport, they know that you're a good person, they'll bring you their problems. They're like, "Oh, dealing with this with my boss, like we're trying to figure out this problem," and you're like, "Oh really, we have a solution for that." It's problem solving, the innovation, it all comes from just asking, "How are you?"
How are you, Vicki?
Yeah, that's
I
it.
did that. And you did
Yeah.
that today when we first talked. And not everyone that I interview on this podcast does that. I would say it's a minority who actually get on the call and are open to having a little bit of a conversation to get to know each other. And there's also, I don't know about you, but I feel sometimes when I'm dealing with someone who is at a certain position, the whole title thing,
Yeah,
I feel guilty of taking their time.
sure. Yeah.
And so the chit chat feels something I would love to do, but I feel like I'm taking over the time without deserving it just yet.
Build it into your agenda. Sometimes it's, if that makes you feel better, as long as, in my experience, as long as you tell them, "Hey, I'm going to spend 30 minutes prepping, 30 minutes on the podcast with you," and they can build in that 60 minutes that they spend with you, you have the right to take that 5 minutes and have a little chit chat.
With any of these meetings where we ask people for their time to ask for advice or their thoughts on our idea or anything like that.
Yeah. No, you could open up with any, what are the interesting books you're reading? You could open with any open-ended question that's very inordinate, just to get the person thinking about things and discovering things.
Yeah, and books reveal a whole lot about people. So
They do. And I can tell you, I asked a previous manager, I asked him what podcasts and books he's reading to, and he was like, it was all about startups when he was recommending them. And I'm like, "Oh, this guy is going to leave the company." 3 months later, he was gone. He went to start his own startup. So you don't know these things. Like, it sounds very innocent. We are amazed at what you will discover by just asking, "Hey, what podcast are you listening to?"
okay, so we're going to give a little tip here for our listeners. Okay. What you're going to do is you're going to ask someone in your organization that you want to connect with what podcast they listen. And then in return, they're going to ask you what podcast you listen to. And then you're going to say, "Speak Your Mind Unapologetically podcast."
Exactly.
I love that. All right. So one of the points that I want to make right now is regarding your favorite quote.
Yeah.
You said that your favorite quote is, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. I love that because there's so many definitions of leadership out there, but I like this one. And I want to ask you it in a slightly different format. And I want to see where your thoughts are, which is, how can your actions inspire others to speak up more so they can dream more, learn more, do more, and become more as they speak up?
I love how you turned that around. I think in my experience, don't be afraid. Like, a lot of times we don't speak up because there's fear of, how will I look? What will people think of me? How will this come across? Like, we doubt ourselves so much. And so just lead by example. Remember that people are watching you too. Whether you are a junior person or a senior person rising in your organization, I'm always amazed when women come up to me and they're like, "Oh, I loved how you did this. I can't believe you just showed up for that." And then, what did I do? I'm like, I wasn't even paying attention. I just did it. And just like with kids, right? They say kids don't listen to what you say, they watch what you do. And I think this quote resonates with that, because if you lead by example, to give yourself a little bit bravery, say, I'm not just doing this for me, I'm doing this because I'm setting an example, because there's other women watching me, they're watching me in the workforce, they're seeing me, and I want to be that good example, because we all owe it to each other to lift each other up. And I truly believe that as women, things are hard for us. We have a lot of responsibilities. We're mothers, we're sisters, we're daughters, many others, and workers, right? On top of all of that, and we're trying to do our best. So sometimes you just have to remember how valuable you are and how important you are. And just by speaking up, you're helping all these other women and girls out there and setting an example for them.
Yeah, and I think it's a great reminder that we're enough, we're valuable,
Yeah,
and we're doing a lot already. And we are examples for others, even if we don't intend to be. My last question for you is around AI.
sure.
You are a passionate advocate of AI. You talk a lot about it, you post about it, I think you even work with it. And AI has a lot to do with innovation. And we started the conversation talking about innovation. So I'd love your thoughts on AI and innovation, just because it's something that's really out there right now. And not a lot of people are attempting to use it. Maybe they're scared. I'd love your thoughts on it.
Yeah, as you've seen, I've been posting a lot and talking a lot and learning a lot. Honestly, I'm learning a lot about AI. I think AI just encompasses so many things, but in the end, it's a very different way of being in the world, right? And as a technologist, I've been part of the internet revolution, and I've seen what it has done for business, with so much of our shopping now being done online. I love Instacart. My groceries are being delivered home. AI has a new way of transforming that even further. So what's interesting about it is that now we're going to have an opportunity to work alongside of machines. And there's things that machines do much better than humans. And those things are memorization. If you give machine a bunch of information, it's going to know a lot more than us. It takes us a long time to learn our multiplication tables, for example, in school. Machine can do that in seconds, probably maybe even less, right? So what machines are good at is memorization and regurgitating those facts that they already learned from. What humans need to become better at is asking questions and being critical thinkers. And what I'm excited about in terms of AI is not AI itself, but how do we work alongside machines in the future? Because the rate of acceleration in terms of change is going to be nothing like we've seen before. We've seen the agricultural revolution, right? It took some time, a couple hundred years. We've seen the industrial revolution. Now, this is its own revolution, and it's not going to take a couple hundred years. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see huge amount of change. And I know a lot of people are afraid of it, and they just want to say, oh, I don't want to hear anything about this, and it can change things. But if you don't embrace it in terms of learning, right? Learning how to work with machines, learning what machines can do better than you, learning what you can do better than machines, and really creating a new world in terms of how you will live in it. Because the rate of change, I know I'm talking a lot, the rate of change we're experiencing now is nothing like we've experienced as humans in the past. And AI is about to accelerate that. We're not good with change. I can tell you from working on this transition, I'm like, I'm not good with change. Just keep things the way they are. I'm happy. Change is happening. It's here. And that's all just about adoption. So if you want to learn about AI, the number one thing you can do is ask questions, because the data is there. But what you need to do is ask questions and then know approximately what the answer should be. So when AI feeds you garbage, which it will, you can say, no, thank you. You're wrong, right? So that's going to be the next skill set. It's really this prompt engineering. How do we interact with machines and ask it questions so we can get value out of it?
And in a way, it's like interacting with humans. And we were talking about asking questions before. It's just knowing how to ask good questions. You're able to get the best out of out of people. Like part of the quality of the podcast is based on how good of questions I'm able to ask. It really depends on that. It's the same with machines in being able to think critically. So I think that's a very
It's a huge skill set. I actually talked to Dr. Robert Viswas, Diener, and he has a book out about questions. He's a coach. He's a psychology coach, and I took a course with him on coaching people. But what I talked to him about at the end, I said, you're asking people questions. I'm like, it's the same. What is that structure of the question? Because it's the same way you need to ask the machine questions. And he said, you start a little broader and then you start to narrow down on the subject matter. And it's exactly the same thing. So what we're learning is we're interacting with machines using language, which we're all familiar with. So we have to use language to ask questions in a good way, and then use critical thinking to make sure that doesn't feed us bad information.
Oh, that's so right. And what you just mentioned from this person you talked to is it's often not just a single question. It's a sequence of questions that progressively narrow down together with your critical thinking and asking questions and following up based on what you're hearing, just like you would if you're managing someone.
Exactly. It's exactly the same thing. And that's why it's so important to develop that skill set, because I always, even when I interview people, I see what questions they ask me, because I think it takes a lot more intelligence to ask question, a really good question, than to answer a question, because you can memorize the answer very easily. But to ask a question, it shows that you've used a lot of critical thinking skills to really narrow down the question in the right way. So if you have to teach yourself to ask questions, that's probably the number one skill I would focus on right now.
And it also helps innovation, and
Yes.
it helps trust building. Asking questions helps everything that we've talked about today. Problem, innovation, everything. Because if you know how to ask questions with the right intent in the right way, then you're able to advance conversations, objectives, everything.
Yes, 100%. Whether you're talking to a machine or a person.
Whether with a machine or a person, absolutely. So let's recap, because you shared a whole lot today. Let's recap some of the key points here for our listeners to take away with them and start implementing.
I think from my perspective, it's all about building trust, right? It starts with trust, and then it moves into really, how do you do that? You do that by asking, how are you, right? You ask questions, and then you remember to network, because we're all human and we want to learn from each other. And remember that no one knows everything. So take the time to learn if you don't know, and be open with it, because everyone else is making up stuff too.
That is so true. People are making things up. I love the point of the question and of making sure that people are able to support each other in showcasing their voices, in helping them and giving them that ownership and showing how they can live up to that ownership using their strengths so that they can feel comfortable sharing their ideas, their thoughts, but also their questions as well. And I'm definitely going to take forward that idea of how are you? What book have you been reading? What podcast have you been exploring? And just spending some one-on-one time, ideally even in a personal setting, to build that trust and being able to help understand people a little bit better. And then through those conversations, then help people feel more comfortable speaking up, expressing themselves, their ideas, expressing their questions as well, and then using that to problem solve or deal with people who are a little bit aggressive in a meeting, in a setting. And yeah, that was a great story as well.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this podcast. Thank you so much, Ivna. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Vicki, for sharing all these wonderful insights.